Hello, my name is Gina Clifford, and I'm here with Louise Mowbray, and together we are in conversation. And today we are delighted to host Tanja Schindler, who's a futurist, who's also the vice chair of the Association of Professional Futurists, a keynote speaker, Foresight advisor to the EU Commission, founder of Futures2All, and guardian of future spaces. Tanja, welcome. And before we get started, give us a little bit more about yourself, a short background, and then we'll jump right into the topic of living with AI and participatory futures.
Sure. I think I have two souls in my chest, and I think most futurists come from those different perspectives. I actually did my undergrad in engineering, business and engineering, with focus on electrical engineering, which is a quite straight and calculated, you would say, topic. But on the other hand, I was always a Latin dancer since I was 12, and I was a really creative person. So during my studies, I missed a little bit of this until I really, in my first job, explored futures. And this is where the puzzle pieces for me came together, where I say, wow, the engineering, the technology here in Germany, this is how you kind of get introduced to the future first, really got me into the space. But then you you can imagine the future and you can just think broadly. This is where really my creativity kicked in. And then I did my Master's of Strategic Foresight at the Swinburne University in Melbourne, where my view got broadened to, there's not just technology about the future, really think about social change, the economy, where you want to be. There was a lot more questions asked than answers given. And this is, I think, still one of the most important gifts or skills of futurists today. We're not here to provide the answers, but to ask the right questions so we can explore multiple futures and we open perspectives and discussions on the future.
Perfect. So talk to us a little bit about what you think participatory futures are and what you're kind of doing around that.
Yeah. Coming from more traditional foresight, where it's really around trend exploration and trend evaluation, and then you do a whole scenario process on that, I really shifted away from that during my studies in Australia, where we really had conversations about the future. And I found there was something deep and nurturing in being in the world and then starting on it rather than just creating it. So I thought about how can you faster create scenarios or use scenarios and start a process on that. And there's always this really expression on the push and the pull on the future. And I really believe in this. So the push is where we look at trends, and trends is always something from the past or the present, something that's emerging, but we see it today. And then we can extrapolate or project it into the future. But somehow it really anchors us too much in the present, especially with technology, because we only anticipate technology that we currently know, but maybe we have all different kind of technologies that we would need to solve bigger problems, but we haven't invented it yet. So therefore, I like to jump and use the pull of the future and go into what is the future if we would have a white canvas, and what would we desire, what would we fear. I mean, we get a lot of fear from dystopians and futures, and sometimes, unfortunately, the news. But what is the world we want to live in? And this is really where I believe everyone has a saying, and where most data of the future, because it doesn't exist, comes from, is by bringing diverse people together, and to really be a global community of future thinkers that think about the future they would like to see, or they can even imagine. Because imagining the future really depends on where you're born, where you're from, how you identify, what you experience. So there's a limited gap of what you can see or imagine in the future. And the more different people you bring together, the more futures you can imagine, and the interesting it gets. And this is where I really found the enriched conversation. Not saying that we don't need trends. I feel this is the foundation of kind of like what we do. But I miss sometimes that we really jump ahead about the futures that we want to create, and the futures that everyone has a saying. And even if they're not trained as a futurist, they can still think and say and have an opinion about the future once you guide them through a process.
I agree. And I think what you're saying is that we really have this innate ability. We just have to unlock it, the curiosity about what could be, to think about possible futures and give ourselves agency or the permission to think about that, and maybe even start to work toward that. But I want to turn it over to Louise, because Louise, what she said a few minutes ago, kind of resonated with me because it's something that you had said when you work with leaders and you do, I don't know what you call it, the pull of the past. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. The past, yeah.
Yeah, the weight of the past. Sorry, the pull of the future.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, I'm so glad you brought this up, Tanja, because this, push and the pull and the weight of the past is so powerful. And I'm actually finding working, especially around decisions, because of course decisions are all, there's so much data that we have. And yet it literally falls to the wayside the minute that our global context changes in a flash. And I think that if the last 4 years have taught any of us anything, it's that the context can change in a moment. So, the pandemic, and then, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine, and then ChatGPT arrived and changed the whole sort of landscape, the business landscape. Not that it hadn't been around for quite some time, but at least we were able to suddenly interact with it, and our fascination with all of that. And then, of course, the current situation with the Israeli-Hamas war, which is really what we're experiencing at the moment is a kind of collective trauma. Mm-hmm. But when we look at how our lives, and that's just on a global scale, but if we look at everything that's going on even locally, or climate change or migration that's caused by it, no matter how well prepared, and human beings have this extraordinary ability. We've got this really incredible ability to create some sort of sense of stability, but of course it all just disappears in a flash, which is very unnerving and produces incredible stress response. So for me, I also like to have a look at the weight of the past, and perhaps using a futures triangle where you sort of have these three corners pulling at each other, and really try to unravel what we're carrying with us that we no longer need, especially around digging into corporate cultures and the way things have always been done, or perhaps policies and how things have been set up, and the continuation of what was. I mean, how much of this do we need to carry? And then when you look at it in combination with the pull of the future and the push of the present, the stuff that's going on at the moment, suddenly we're able to make better decisions, because every decision, well, I mean, it might be a sort of educated guess backed by a whole bunch of data, but and most of the time that's okay. But every now and again something comes along and just throws the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So from a decision-making perspective, I think that for a long time, futures tools and models and frameworks lived in futures worlds, or in strategy and strategic foresight. Whereas I think today, this idea that, and I think I was reading an article of yours where you said, the future belongs to all of us. And so how do we utilize all these amazing, tools that we have to actually start visioning or envisioning or imagining into a future that we're co-creating as we speak? And Gina, I'd love to hear Tanja's perspective on that, but to pass it back to you, what are your thoughts around that?
I think you're exactly right, both of you. You're saying that, for lack of a better word, futures are stuck in academic terms, right? Terminologies that, unless you're a professional practitioner and use all these terms, it doesn't resonate with the business world. You use those terms for people that aren't schooled in futures thinking academically, and their eyes glaze over, because they can't see how it's relevant to them. It almost sounds very much niche, and people sitting in their ivory towers thinking about this together in closed doors. But really what we're saying is that if you think about it, if we stop using the words that futurists use to describe these frameworks and these tools in academic terms, then people can embrace the ideas behind it and use them to actually create the change that's needed in futures, within organizations, within education, within our personal lives. It's really not magic. It's really not anything special. It's just a different way of thinking. And Tanja, I would like for you to weigh in on what's going on right now to, at least with what you're leading, to help like bridge that gap between the jargon and how do we get this in the hands of the organizational leaders and educators and the community?
I think we need to acknowledge or rediscover that we all human and human being, and also in the professional world. Because what I like about the way in the past, you can also replace this about the fears that are holding us back. And there's so many fears. A lot of times it's why we don't get people into the future or talking about futures, because they fear of losing something today that they have, and they cannot imagine a better future, what they would gain when they actually let something go. And I think it's really about those narratives. So it's not just creating those images in the future, but really the pathways and the narratives, how we guide people there. And in the business world, I have a lot of times the feeling, that we either just jargon or other things, and we don't acknowledge that we're all human beings that also live half of the year at home or in a private life, and then half of a year or a life we are actually part of an organization. And organizations these days, I think, underestimate the responsibilities they also have on their employees, and that they actually show up every day to do business, and what the contribution would be, what is the purpose of that organization, that if I grow up and go there, I really feel I do change something, and I have influence and I have impact. And I feel a lot of times it comes back to those 9-to-5 jobs and those small goals, and we really lost the big perspective because we're just measuring shareholder value or benefits within the 2 or 3 years. Whereas we in Futurists, we love this world that starts with 10 or 30 years, just because it removes the barriers a bit. If we just think about the current system, almost feel nothing feels possible because everything is crumbling. We feel really misled. There is a problem with our economic and other systems. So I think we need to let go of that. And this, again, what I love about this participatory or imagined futures, like, okay, go there. The EU Commission, we said, the Earth become uninhabitable and it's the super saddest thing ever. We sent you to a new planet. What do you see there? What would you create? And people actually value a lot of the good things that are happening here. And most of that is actually human connection and others. So as much as I love technology from my engineering background, I think we really need to see this more as a vehicle and as an enabler to make our lives easier in some kinds, but acknowledging that a lot of things that make us human is this human connection and this human experience and being actually in nature. We see this every day when we sit in front of a computer, how fast the time rushes. And if you go out for a walk, it feels like 15 minutes can be ages, and it's really exhausting to walk up the hill. So future of perception of time is also really depending on where we're currently at. And I think this is something that really hasn't been explored. And all the fear, on the other hand, for technology, for future, for AI, I think more also the maybe not imagination where we can use it for good or how we can live alongside with it and still feel connected. Because this almost counterbalance that we as connected as before, and we feel as disconnected mentally and health-wise to other people as ever. And going back to what really makes us human and feels us human and makes us jump out of bed every day to do something. I think this is where we can transform organizations, where we can transform economic systems, and at the end, hopefully actually create a better world. Because at the end, I don't believe anyone on either side of wars or on enemies, I don't like those framing as well, wants that. Because my enemy is probably only because I don't understand or I haven't seen their perspective. I don't think that either one mother on either side wants that their son or daughters are dying in any war. So for me, it's really hard to understand, why are we having this? Why can we not have conversations where we agree to disagree and we still find a way out in holding the uncertainty? Or my term, I think we really need to learn more to dance with the uncertainty and not finding the answers, but holding the questions until we can move further because we understand the problem better.
Yeah, I think that you've said so much, you have so much wisdom in those words. And I could pick out a couple of things to focus in on, and maybe Louise, you want to jump in as well. But I want to go back to what you said about technology, and as humans, we have agency to do things, but we rely on technology. How will artificial intelligence play into that? think about how we're already saying, oh, ChatGPT is smarter than us, so let's just let it do it. And then we won't have to think about it. It'll write for us, it'll draw for us, it'll search the web for us and give us all the facts we need, and we'll just present that, and we'll not have to worry about thinking. But that doesn't seem that that's a future that's going to be very much fun for people, to be honest with you, right? That seems kind of boring. So how do we embrace artificial intelligence so that what you said about wanting to get out of bed in the morning and being excited to go to your job or to do whatever you want to do, how do we take AI, looking into the future, how do we shape it? Because right now it's, in my opinion, it's not being shaped in that way. I think some people want to take it and work with it, but and as many of our guests have said, most people want to leverage it to make more money. And so they're going to cut costs by cutting people. But that's very short-sighted, because as we all agree, people are very much central to this. But yeah, your thoughts, and then Louise, I would like to know what you think about that.
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, with AI, I think it's always the thing, or even technology, that we fear they losing the jobs, or we do, because we just see what we rationalize from it, or restructuring, and not what we're gaining. Again, the pathway, we use a lot of fear to guide people into the future instead of what they're knowing. A couple of years ago, there's hundreds of jobs that haven't existed. I mean, social media managers, and even others. I'm not just saying that tech brings more tech jobs than the others, but it can also be, how can we use technology to enlarge our human-to-human time? So, for example, there is a benefit of AI or robotics or others to collect faster data, to write things probably faster, to summarize things that probably take ages and ages of people. But how can we then use, for example, in our caring and nurturing system, that people actually get more support or more time to be there for people and to listen to people and to care for people? And there's an AI who calculates all the things that are needed for prescription for medicine, and maybe a robot who helps doing the heavy lifting. So just imagining in what time and creativity we could use, what time we can win from that. But that changes the paradigm to say, if we're just using it to gain more money, that is still in the belief that money makes you actually happy and everyone wants to gain more money, where there are studies that most managers who are on top and are rich are very lonely and unhappy. And the happiest people actually live in countries that are not rich and they don't have much, because there's other values to it. So if we would be able to shift our society perspective, that value is for actually time, and time being human interaction time, and this is it, then maybe you don't earn money through your work or the time that you spend at work, but maybe from the contribution you do to society or the contribution you do with creativity. But it is a whole new concept, and it's way more complicated to think about that than just like AI is maybe killing us or ruins the world. This narrative is very easy to imagine, because we have so many sci-fi movies who also do that. But really think about, how could a world where we use AI and technology to actually gain more time, where we can do good, and we may be paid for this beneficial time and not paid for the time we're sitting there and studying data that someone else or an AI can do faster. So the interesting part is really the paradigm shift of how we see our economy in total, and society in the future.
Yeah, that's, I thoroughly agree. And I think we've spoken about this a little bit before. And Gina, one of the conversations we had was with the professor. We were talking about learning and teaching and the future of all of that. And, he just made such a salient point, which is that, AI is a great explainer. So if we can, take what we need to learn in terms of the actual content and have AI, well, it wouldn't just be AI, but let's call it emergent technologies or various different convergent technologies, do the dull job of explaining and actually free us up to ignite those kind of conversations, dig in, debate, add meaning. therein lies the joy. I mean, the joy in learning is really the joy of understanding. It's, making sense of. And if I look at the various different job functions that we find throughout, typical of most organizations, there are so many really desperately dull jobs or parts of jobs that would be absolutely brilliant for, to not have to be done by us. And this kind of epidemic of quiet quitting, I mean, what's that all about? I mean, it's been around forever. In the work that I do, we talk about it being in resignation. So your bum might be in the seat, you might be present, but you're not there. And, if we think of, as you said, Tanja, 50% of our lives spent doing a job where we're actually emotionally, not there. I mean, there is nothing probably more soul destroying than to be involved in sort of activities every day where it's just not doing much for us or anybody else. And then, of course, this innate, beautiful human imagination and connection, as you say, I mean, that's the lifeblood of it all. Will we need to relearn to do it? I don't believe so. I believe that that's inherent to each and every one of us. It may just have been squished out of us over the years through our systems, education, environments. I think probably the trickiest thing is for people over the age of 35 or so to actually go back to relearning how to exercise all of those things that are part of who we are as human beings, and perhaps undo some of the weight of the past that we're all carrying, or we've been conditioned to carry. Gina, I know you've got quite strong views around this as well.
Yeah, I was actually curious because before we started this conversation, we were talking with Tanja, and she talked a little bit about speculative futures. And I really think that is a key to bringing everybody into the conversation, because everybody's read a fictional book at some point in their lives, a comic book even, or watched a sci-fi thriller movie. It doesn't even have to be a thriller, right? Just something that takes you to a different world, a different scenario beyond. It takes you out of your current reality. And I think if we want to talk about people participating in these futures, thinking, shifting their thoughts about stuck in the past, and this back to the office kind of thing is ludicrous. People should go back to the office if they want to work on a project and they want to collaborate in person, face to face. That's wonderful. But just to sit in an office on your computers, on your phones, whatever, doesn't make a lot of sense in a digital world where for many of us, have the benefit of high-speed internet and video, Zoom calls. Here we are, we're in 3 different parts of the world, and we're all conversing at the same time, and we're having this great conversation. So and it would be lovely to meet for coffee and collaborate on some speculative fiction together. That would be a wonderful time, that use of our time to spend in person. So why, we ask ourselves, why are we falling back with that weight of the past? Maybe it's because it's comfortable. We don't give ourselves permission to think differently about the future or about what's possible. But going back to Tanja, talk a little bit about speculative fiction and how you bring people into the future through that vehicle, because that's something I love.
I think the 2 aspects with it. One is if you do speculative design and you really move a bit away from what is currently and what could be, right? To really what if, and you open it up, you can just really craft those new narratives. Unfortunately, humanity is always drawn to more risk and to more bad. It's probably because that was necessary for survival in the past, and it's probably down deep in our cortex that we kind of need to pay more attention to the bad things happening so we can avoid them. But I feel at the end that's the downfall as well, because it almost creates self-fulfilling prophecies. And you see that when you want to buy a new thing, there's so much information out there, our brain cannot cope that. So you have a specific filter, and this filter is matching to the images that you have in your head. So if we just have fiction in our head that is around dystopians and how the world goes down, I'm pretty sure we actually see more signals today that lead into those futures, and unintentionally probably even supporting them or resigning and saying, I cannot do anything anyway, so it just happened, that those worlds more and more emerge. And what I would love with speculative design in the fiction is to really think about those positive ones. I know, and this is another futurist friend of mine who introduced protopia compared to utopia, Monica Bielski, and it's a good thing that I also wasn't completely aware of, but utopia has been quite misused in the past. There was utopians to create that only white people with blue eyes, so in Germany, should be existing in it. So this is probably also not the world to go, but with protopia or with a different wording where we really see how can we create a world that is most inclusive and most of us want to live in. And I honestly believe we're not too far away from that if we go away from our extremes, beliefs and other parts and really become what we want to create. So the thing about those protopians or good futures is maybe then they may be too boring. So I think this is the narratives and the speculative where we actually need to bring that in to say there's still challenges in the future, even if the good futures, but show a pathway in a narrative how to overcome that. I would love that people go out of movies and it's not like, oh, we're all doomed, humanity is so bad, but we go out and say, oh, that's a challenge, but let's start doing something against it today. Because it's not the few people who give us different visions about the future of the tech giants who tell us it is. It's all of us, and it's all society that can shape the future. So we really need to empower people and make them believe that their action matters and their action today already shaping the future. And it's all that we can do to imagine what we want to create and how to do it. The problem with that is I think we unlearned or maybe not access this ability to experience futures in the now. So with speculative futures or creating artifacts, what a lot of time the outcome of speculative design is that you bring something from the future in the present where people really have this experience or see what it could be. And I feel this is where people are more likely to let go of the weight and the barriers that hold them back to see, okay, if I let go of my car and it's really, really annoying that I now have to drive or cannot drive everywhere fast, but maybe you need to walk more because you're healthier. You may be less stressed. Maybe it's good for your mental health. Maybe you connect with the person walking next to you and you don't have to go 20 kilometers or 100 kilometers to your office because you can work from everywhere. So if you have technology that delivers you things and you just go out to meet people and you can do this in a different way, maybe the car doesn't become what isn't as important, and the things you gain for your health and your mental and your social connections are maybe bigger than the nice car that you may just go to the racetrack for the weekend. I don't know. So I think those narratives, just to think differently, this will change, and speculative design of futures can really help building this bridge, because everyone loves stories and we all are born and grown up by stories. So I think we need to tell us more stories of the futures that we want to have.
Yeah, I think the challenge with some of that is, again, the word, even speculative design. If you say that to someone in a corporate environment, they have no idea what that is. And maybe it doesn't even sound appealing or relevant to them. So I think the challenge is, how do we make that relevant to people that are leading organizations and trying to shape our economy for the future? Because I think all of us spend a lot of time working, and or for organizations that may not embrace these kinds of things. So I think the challenge is, how do we get them to embrace this kind of thinking? And I don't know, Louise, do you want to weigh in and talk about some of the ways that you're getting organizations to think about futures thinking without having to use the jargon? And especially, I don't know if you've used any speculative design avenues, but or if you have thoughts on how we get people there to start creating these artifacts.
Yeah, so just to put things into context, I mostly work with leadership teams at C-suites. So when I say the word design in that environment, it dies a little death, and because it's not strategy, and it's not kind of the measurables or the optimization and the kind of focus that, you know, leadership teams typically have. So I know in my experience, what I've got to do is I've got to meet people where they're at. So what they're optimizing for, what they're thinking about with the language that they're using. And once we've met there, then we can start working about into the what ifs and what if we design it so. And then the language is much easier to bring in. But I think often we can take, you know, we were just chatting before we started this this call about the fact that, you know, we should lose some of the terms like futures literacy. What does it mean? It just means really understanding how we can work with the future in ways that are very real today. And I loved what you said, Tanja, about protopian futures. And I also know somebody who's very much focused on that. And I love the fact that, you know, we're working towards something that ultimately is pro-human, pro all of us. It's something that, you know, and others might say, well, you know, that's my social cause, or that's my purpose, or so perhaps just looking at bringing in the kind of language that is being used in the environment where we find it. In some environments, we talk about this as meeting people where they are, meeting them again, and then, of course, being able to lead. And I think that trust relationship needs to exist. But the other thing is that, as you said, Tanja, people love stories. And if we can connect, you know, people's purpose in their organization, what they're optimizing for, to the stories of the future that, you know, work with the vision that they have, then things start to come alive. And instead of talking about, you know, just an example, corporate values, you know, which really is enough to kill most conversations, and most people can't remember them. It's about, well, what do you value? You know, what do you value in life? What do you value in your life? And suddenly everything shifts. So language is so powerful. I think we haven't paid enough attention to it for quite some time, but it's just, it's amazing hearing so much more. And the idea of artifacts is interesting, because even if you give people or you ask them to pick up something that would remind them of, let's say, a session that you've worked in together, even if you don't frame it in that way, people have some sort of emotional connection to a thing that reminds them of a time where they had a certain feeling. And it's always related to an emotion or a feeling. So I think there are lots of ways to do this. And, you know, as with anything, I think that I'm also guilty of getting stuck into, you know, terms and phrases that really don't serve anybody and don't explain anything and don't invite people in. So yeah, this conversation is a great reminder. Thank you. I've got a question as well, which I'd love to hear more about, Tanja, from you. And that is that this question of, I mean, I know that we've had this whole sort of existential bubble, you know, crisis bubble around technology and the convergence of technologies. But if we had to play this movie forward and we had to sort of shapeshift 20 years out, how do you see the average person entering into the workplace? What does their day look like? What might they expect?
I always say I don't do predictions, but my desired future on that, and this being from corporate. And as we said before, unfortunately, because corporate grows so big, there are those positions or jobs where people just show up, but they don't know why they show up or what actually they're contributing to the bigger purpose of the organization, if it's even needed. On the other hand, I mean, a big corporates, they're between 50 and 500,000 people working in. So it's a big impact and a big responsibility to that. So how I see that, and that's in general the future, and also the emerge how we should use technology, is what is the problem and what do we need from that? And the problem is, in the back end, we can back to the school, that we sit there and kids, they're not allowed to work together doing an exam to come to the solution, which is like total anti to all the entrepreneurs that we would need. So ideally, our education system will already be structured, and the same in the workspace. So there should be ecosystems and networks of organizations that work together to solve a problem about mobility. And this might not just be an automotive company, that's really across the sector. And people should move fluidly across the sector to different projects that are there to be solved, so that you actually bring your knowledge across those different projects, and it's not a lot of the subculture or sub-innovation that just happen or is siloed, and 3 departments are doing the same because they're not even talking to each other what they're doing. So really, how can you solve a bigger problem, which in the end could be that the automotive manufacturer may actually not manufacture cars anymore because they figured walking for people in cities is actually better, and they need to come up with a different idea. So the future of organizations, or the future how we work, I think should be addressed around what are the key competencies and skills of individuals, and also on the organizational level, and then what future problem or issue or challenge are they tackling, and then you match this. So you may need to try and kill your favorite product or service, because that's not leading actually to a solution. It's maybe even causing the problem, again, weight of the past. So, but that's also goes to that in war of talent, a horrible word too, in the search for talent, you cannot even get people globally in a team or apply them. It's not even possible in Europe. In Europe, you're allowed to actually work everywhere, but if you're not living in Germany, I cannot hire you except for as a freelancer because of the social securement system, because that's country rights and not globally. So we really, I think, need to rethink how organizations and how we work and how we contribute and how we can exchange talent and exchange people to solve really problems, and not to keep the problems. And this becomes then a really, really fluid workspace where you be in a different team today than tomorrow, but we're solving something, and then you dismantle and you go to the next problem on it. That's how I'm putting it.
Yeah, I love that. I've been just digging in a little bit into Gen Alpha and how, of course, you know, how they think is being shaped by the types of games they play and the critical thinking, and the fact that, you know, they will bring in this kind of purpose-driven leadership into our organizations in a very short period of time. I mean, that's their, you know, they're intimately connected to that kind of driver in a way that perhaps, and I'm not so sure I really adhere to the strict ideas about, you know, age cohorts and things like that, but that, you know, perhaps people haven't in the past. And Gina, I'd love to hear your perspective around that, because in terms of what will we be going to work for? I mean, 20 years is no time at all. And yet it's at the pace and intensity of change we're experiencing and probably will continue to experience. It's, you know, it's all the time in the world for a whole lot to happen. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, there's a lot there. I think I'd start with thinking about where technology is going to go in 20 years. That's a long time for technology to evolve and to shape the future, to shape our world. And if we think about the things that are causing a lot of this quiet quitting and this disengagement with our jobs, it is partly because some of these jobs are really boring and repetitive tasks, and people don't have connection with the bigger purpose of the company. But also a lot of folks aren't getting paid very much at all to do a job. And so there's not a big reason to show up, or they need a paycheck, but there's not like a clear pathway to more prosperity or more engagement, right? It's just they're kind of stuck there. So what if technology takes that into account and says, well, you know, if we think about organizations and the CEO makes that 50,000 times more than the average worker, but they're not doing 50,000 times more work, perhaps there's more equity that happens there through technology. So maybe an artificial intelligence like scenario comes in and takes over a lot of those core decisions that maybe C-suites and CEOs make. So maybe the CEO is a really important person in the company, but maybe that person doesn't make so much more money than the rest of the organization. And there's a lot more that goes around. so wealth that gets dispersed among the workforce. And then, of course, money isn't going to drive everything, as we said, as Tanja said, doesn't make people happier. But you need some security. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people need that basic level of security. And I think getting them to that point where they don't have to worry about if they can afford to rent a flat or to choose between paying the power bill or buying groceries. For a vast majority of people around the world, that's still a reality. There's a lot of people that are just getting by. So equity across the board, I think technology could help with that. And then you have the Gen Alphas coming in and the Gen Zs that are there now, that are now entering the workforce. Their values are a lot different than generations past. We've seen that they've pushed for more thinking about sustainability. And of course, they're not wanting to work exorbitant amount of hours for little pay. They want time balance, work-life balance, time to be with their families and their friends or to pursue their interests. So I think that technology is going to help us there as well. So as Tanja said, people are going to be able to maybe be more fluid, jump in and out of projects. Maybe there is set companies. Maybe technology takes over a lot of these. Excuse me for one moment. I've got some noise in the background. Okay, sorry. I think technology is going to help us create some equity. People are going to have more time to engage with things that they want to do, so they don't have to work for a job to make a living. They work because they want to do it, because it's more aligned with their passion. And I see that happening right now with Gen Z. Probably is going to happen with Gen A as well. And I think it's going to be very different than what it looks like today. We probably wouldn't recognize it as work. Probably it's more passion aligned. But that's as Tanja would say, that's my preferred future. I'm not predicting the future, but that's what I would like to see. And if you want to take it, Louise, and paint your picture.
Yeah, I'm still sitting with something Tanja said earlier about imagine writing exams together. And I think these kind of conversations are brilliant because they trigger things that we haven't thought about before. And just the idea that, we should be able to memorize and regurgitate as if we were machines. Of course, it harps back to the machine metaphor of the 50s. It came out of engineering, your field, Tanja. And, it's a ridiculous idea. I mean, we're meaning-making machines, if anything, rather than, rote learning and regurgitation machines, although there are a percentage of the population who are particularly good at it. So perhaps that's kind of set the standards for our educational or, intellectual, excellence, perhaps quite wrongly. So, yeah, I love little things that spark off different ideas, because when you reach into that idea, then you reach into all of the weight of the past, the systemic thinking, the policies, the things that have held our structures together. And whenever I look at something, there is this wonderful acronym, the point of a system is what it does, POSI, which is ultimately just have a look at what something is optimized for, to know exactly what's going on in that system. And I think that instead of clashing with something and fighting it and trying to bring it down, rather let's work with it and see what we can create together, that protopian future we talked about. And Tanja, before we finish off, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
I would just go the same line. It's really about seizing the opportunities and not being too bound by our fears. I feel just more what we want to create. I believe technology can be useful really to save us time and to others. We just really need to imagine also the society that we want to live in. And this is sometimes harder to imagine, but necessary shift so that we actually create the world that we live in. And it's not just all around the technology that keeps us away, but it's maybe the technology that connects us. And that's just for everyone to invite and to think about this. So if you think about how societies or our economic system, our connection with nature needs to change, and how technology can support that. And in the end, it's then for us and for organizations to take futures responsibility and take responsibility for the actions that we're doing, and are they actually contributing to society and contributing to keeping the environment alive, or is it just for their own benefits? And this is something we should question. And this is probably be questioned by generations Z and A, because they don't want to work for organizations that harm the environment or to do it. They rather go and travel to Bali and stay there for the rest of their lives. So I think it needs to change, because there won't be this workforce that we're currently having be reproduced, and people looking for different parts and things. So it's on us to imagine that.
Love that. Thank you so much, Tanja. And on the note of imagination, anything you'd like to add, Gina?
I think Tanja said it very well. And thank you, Tanja, for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We certainly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
I did as well. Thanks.